The spread of COVID in Indigenous communities have been a real concern throughout the pandemic, and the rise of the Omicron variant in recent weeks is fueling new worries. There were more than 2,200 active cases in the country, according to Indigenous Services Canada, as of yesterday, and officials reporting just over 500 infections specifically relating to Omicron across 29 First Nations communities, the majority of those in eastern Canada. And again, that would be anticipated, as is the case nationally, to be an undercount. There's one area reeling particularly right now, and that is Bearskin Lake First Nation in northern Ontario. It's 425 kilometers north of Sioux Lookout, and almost half the community has tested positive. We're going to focus on that situation for the next few minutes with the Grand Chief of the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation, Bearskin Lake First Nation, part of the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation. Grand Chief Derek Fox is with me this morning. He represents 49 First Nations across Northern Ontario. He himself a member of Bearskin Lake First Nation, and he's in Thunder Bay. Grand Chief Fox, thank you for being our guest this morning.
Yes, thank you for having me on the show, Heather, and good morning to everyone. Good
morning. It's important to talk about what is happening in Bearskin Lake First Nation. Declared a state of emergency back at the end of December. What are you hearing this morning? What is the current situation there today?
The current situation is they have 187 positive cases. And out of the 120 homes situated on the First Nation, 57 of those are in quarantine. And they're still negotiating with the federal government on support. I'm not sure what the current numbers are going to be today and what kind of support is being sent. But I know that there's been a declaration from Bearskin Lake First Nation themselves for potential Army support. And I know that I read an article yesterday saying that the Army hadn't received that, but I know that Bearskin Lake First Nation did issue a press release declaring that and asking for military support.
Okay, I want to just talk about some of the things you raised, Grand Chief Fox, in a little bit more detail. When you give us those numbers, this is just in a matter of 8 days now, 187 positive cases in the community, and all of those homes were quarantined in effect. Just for people to understand, that's around half of the population affected by this right now, correct?
Correct. And you could imagine, if you put that into perspective, for example, in Toronto, just imagine in Toronto, which has a population of roughly 3 million people, what would happen if 1.5 million people in Toronto got sick with the Omicron or COVID? What would happen? What kind of outcry, what kind of response would there be from the federal and provincial government? I think there would be an emergency. I think things would happen quicker. It seems that Bearskin Lake, when they declared this an emergency, no one wanted to acknowledge that it was an emergency. So they sent in nurses. But currently, there's if you've been to Bearskin, you'll know that there's no hospital, there's no emergency services, there's no doctor on call. So should something happen, should an emergency occur, we're at the risk of loss of life. So at this point in time, Bearskin and his partners continue to ask the government to acknowledge at least that this is an emergency, a crisis that needs to be, action needs to be taken.
So again, this is a community very remote. One in which there are few resources, as you mentioned, none of the kind of hospital or medical resources that would be required to deal with some of this. And I would imagine some of the people involved in critical care in the First Nation are themselves affected by this illness as it's spreading as quickly and as widespread as it is. There has been, we did get some details from Bearskin Lake First Nation that there has been some help offered in terms of resources, nearly $500,000, Grand Chief Fox, for PPE, for spaces for isolation and for transportation. But as I understand it, the real need is for people to respond, even to do things like chop wood so people have heat for their homes.
Yeah, the real issue is they need boots on the ground. They do appreciate all the support they've been receiving from neighboring communities and of course, the funding announcement. But the problem is there's no boots on the ground. So that freight or that money or whatever comes into the First Nation, there's no one there to deliver those things. There's no one there to cut the wood because is COVID, and the essential workers that usually do this for the First Nation are sick themselves. So they're at a breaking point, and they're basically begging for support and assistance, and boots on the ground is what they need today, or even yesterday or last week.
Into the Canadian Armed Forces. We are going to hear from the Prime Minister at 11:30 this morning. I don't know any indication that there may be word from his office that there would be a response, do you think?
We are hoping, and I know that the chief has been working closely with the federal and provincial governments. I know that they've had calls. I've participated in some of those calls. They've been working with some of the government officials, but as far as an announcement, we have not heard anything yet, and we're hopeful that some action is taken.
Okay. You know, as you await that government help, federal and provincial, and the people power that you need, we were looking at some pictures. I want to bring them back because I'd love you to tell the stories, if you could, of how other First Nations have responded to Bearskin Lake First Nation needs. People from Sandy Lake, I know, from Pikangikum. I mean, these are incredible scenes of people showing up on snowmobile from far away. Can you tell me any more details about the kind of response people have coming up to help others in other neighboring First Nations?
Yeah, Big Charles Lake was the ones that drove in. It's a good, I was told 3-hour drive on Skidoo, and you're talking -40, -50 weather. That's a tough drive if you've ever had to do that. And the neighboring communities, Wiagamal, Sandy Lake, I'm not going to try and name them all. They did donation drives. There's people here in the city of Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay is about an hour and a half, hour and 45-minute flight. So there's all kinds of groups, all kinds of people sending in donations, sending in supplies. You know, it's great to see that unity and that care for one First Nation that is struggling. And it just, that's one feel-good story to take from this, for sure.
Well, we'll focus on that for the moment as you await further news in terms of the kinds of assistance that people in Bearskin Lake First Nation are awaiting. Thank you very much for the time today, Grand Chief Fox. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.